Our speaker tonight, as you know from the announcement, is Mansour al-Hadj, who is the director of the Reform Project at the Middle East Media Research Institute. A year or two ago, we had the president of Memory, Yigal Carmen, here. A couple of years ago, while he was still vice president of Memory, Alberto Fernandez. So it's a tremendous pleasure to welcome Mansour here this evening, who has also done me an especially good turn when I was very concerned about the quality of the Arabic translation of The Closing of the Muslim Mind. I was able to take it to him and receive assurances that indeed the translators, who were basically a Sudanese team, had done a wonderful job, and I certainly appreciated his help with that. Before joining Memory, Mansour was a senior reporter for Afaq magazine, an Arabic news website focusing on reform and human rights in the Middle East. He's well known on Capitol Hill, where he's given many briefings, including the topic of movement of extremism in the Muslim world. He grew up in Saudi Arabia, which is a subject on which he will be talking tonight, and he's written about that in a number of articles, as well as some on the Memory website, which I invite your attention to, most particularly one of the more recent and extensive ones. It is impossible to defeat Islamic terrorism without reforming Islam. An earlier one that you can find on Memory, though it wasn't first published there, in my youth I was taught to love death. He obtained his BA in law from the International University of Africa in Khartoum, Sudan in 2003. Please join me in welcoming Mansour al-Hadj.
Thank you very much, Mr. Riley. Thank you, everybody, for coming. My name is Mansour al-Hadj. I was born and grew up in Saudi Arabia, as he said. My family is originally from Chad and Sudan. The third generation in Saudi Arabia, so my grandma moved there a long time ago. My mom grew up there. I was born there, and I have nephews and nieces in Saudi Arabia. Yet I don't have the Saudi citizenship, so I leave it to your imagination. Today I'll be speaking about the prospects of real reform in Saudi Arabia. I know it's a topic that a lot of people, a lot of you are interested in. But before doing that, I would like to say that I have written so many articles and papers about Saudi Arabia. One that I'm really very proud of was for the EHLS program, which is English for Heritage Language Speakers program. That is a government program with Georgetown University. And the simplest idea of this program is to train U.S. citizens who are speakers of heritage languages, such as Arabic, Persian, and some African languages, and Pashto and Urdu, train them to work for the U.S. government, especially the intel agencies. And it's a very useful program, and I'm very proud to have been selected to that program. So my paper on that program was supervised by the National Defense Agency, which is one of our intelligence agencies. And the title of my paper was Saudi Arabia's Shia Opposition. Talking about reform, I would like to start with a story. So this story is an old traditional in the Arabic culture. The story goes that in this city, the river, there was a river, and that river is contaminated with insanity virus, let's say it this way. So whoever swims or drink from the river becomes insane and loses his or her mind. So within a few months, everybody in this little town became insane, and the king, was trying to talk to them to regain their sanity, but it was a helpless case. So his assistant and the people who advises him, consultant, told him to really either drink from the river or swim in it, so he would be on the same page with his people. That king was so smart and wise to do so. In Saudi Arabia today, I think we have a similar situation. I'm not calling the Saudi people insane. In fact, I think the people of Saudi Arabia are contaminated with the love of freedom, with the love of liberty, and with the love of their country. The problem is their leadership is not on the same page with them. And that would leave us with, in my opinion, to a catastrophic result unless the younger leadership in Saudi Arabia, whom I believe have a historical opportunity to reform the country and to respond to the aspirations of the Saudi people. There are three levels of oppressions in Saudi Arabia. People in Saudi Arabia are oppressed politically, religiously, and socially. And you can watch the news, you can follow all the human rights organizations' report on Saudi Arabia, and you will find that currently Saudi Arabia has turned into a police state. We have a huge number of mass arrests, and arresting those who are arrested these days or a few months ago are the finest people in Saudi Arabia. College professors, thinkers, people with different ideas, that people who aspire to change their country, to write a new history for their own country. And unfortunately, they are behind bars as we speak right now. In fact, women have been arrested in the latest wave of arrests. These women are one of the bravest women in Saudi Arabia. College professor like Hatun al-Fasi or Aziza al-Yusuf, a leading human rights or women rights activist, Iman al-Nafjan and Lujain and others. So this is the political oppression part of the problem. In addition to that, there is no freedom of expression in Saudi Arabia. If you look at the Saudi papers, I tweeted the other day that it is as if they were written by one person. Everything is the same. You can't find one single voice of dissent or opposition. I think this is extremely unhelpful, extremely dangerous for the future of the country. Moving to the second form of oppression in Saudi Arabia, which is religious oppression. People are getting oppressed religiously, and by that I mean minorities in Saudi Arabia don't have rights. If we talk about the Shia minority in Medina or in the eastern provinces, they face what we call takfir from the Wahhabi sheikhs and scholars, and they're not allowed to build houses of worships, and they have been discriminated against in every aspect in Saudi Arabia. They don't get hired in higher positions in the army or in the government, and they're under constant oppression. Even the Sunni ones, you're talking about the Sufis in Saudi Arabia, for example. And this oppression is not only in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has exported Wahhabism around the world. And the reason why they succeeded is not because that's the purest version of Islam, but because of the petrodollars that they were able to convince people or hire people to, or bring people into Saudi Arabia to study that version of Islam and then go spread it around the world. As I said, I was born and grew up in Saudi Arabia, but I lived in Chad and Sudan. And I can tell you, my grandma did not my late grandma did not cover her hair. And, you know, when I talked to her, when she was growing up in Chad, covering the hair was not part of the tradition, you know. Right now, you see women in full burqa in one of the hottest countries on earth. Just imagine that. And all that because of the Saudis. So now some of the examples of the lethalness of this ideology, you see a lot of conflicts in countries like Sudan and Chad between those who are supported or educated in Saudi Arabia and the local population, because locally most African countries are Malikis and they tend to be Sufis, which is a sect that Wahhabism consider outsider or consider not real Muslims. So from Saudi Arabia, this ideology that the ruling family in Saudi Arabia exported the problem abroad. And that teaching, as we all know, resulted in the creation of jihadi groups, starting from Al-Qaeda to ISIS, and, you know, the Taliban and all these. All of these groups teach what the current Saudi Arabia is teaching in Saudi school. Also, within the religious oppression, we had until recently, according to the government, women were not allowed to drive cars. And they used to tell people, you know, it is haram or it is not for the best interest if women drive cars. Yet, thankfully, now they're allowed to drive cars, but however, there is something called the male guardianship system, which is a system that put all women under the control of their male relatives. It's from, I don't know if that system even existed in the Stone Ages, but it still existed in Saudi Arabia as we speak right now. The women who were arrested recently, these brave and fine women, the only reason they were arrested was because they wanted to establish a human rights organization to defend women, to defend the women who are being oppressed by their own fathers and brothers and family members. Under the current Saudi system, when these women get abused and go to the government police station, they are told to contact their abusers to come pick them up. So Lujain al-Hadlul and all these women, they wanted to create an organization where women who have been abused by their own family member can find a safe house where they can live and stay until, they can find something to do. A safe place for safety reasons. Moving to my third point, which is social oppression in Saudi Arabia. The Saudis, I think, are the only nation on earth who faces social oppression, meaning interaction between men and women are prohibited. Creation of organization or groups. People don't have rights to establish even small organization where they can, mingle and get together. Other form of social oppression is the fact that, the male guardianship system, where for the woman to travel, she has to get a permission from a father or a brother or even sometimes a son to get a passport or to get a ticket to travel. Now, some people talk about that what Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS, currently doing is not reform, it's not political reform. He is just modernizing Saudi Arabia. Well, I disagree. I think if he is trying to modernize Saudi Arabia, Saudi people need modernized. Saudi people need a modern system, a modern ruling system, a constitution, a parliament, elections. They want to have freedom of expression, freedom of gatherings. All these elements are part of modernity, and if he is not modernizing the political system in Saudi Arabia, I don't think he is modernizing anything. I really don't like talking too much and missing a lot of points. So I would really encourage everyone here to ask a lot of questions. To close, I would like to say, go back to the initial story. Saudi people are yearning for freedom, yearning to take part in the future of their country. And I strongly believe that MBS has a historical opportunity to reform the country by listening to his people. And I have 10 points that I would like to go quickly on about the prospect of real reform in Saudi Arabia. So number one, I would like to say freeing. If we want to have a real reform in Saudi Arabia, freeing all political prisoners and prisoners of conscience in Saudi Arabia. This is my number one. Second, calling for a national dialogue. Open a new page. Call all the opposition, the one inside, the one outside, in exile, call them and start a national dialogue where, where it should discuss a constitution for the country. Number three, drafting a constitution. So drafting a constitution for the country, a constitution that respects all human rights and protects all minorities and push the country and put the country on the right track. Also, one of the prospects, number four, of real reform is investigate or create a body that investigates all corruption or corruption charges against anybody. Right now, Mohammed bin Salman is accusing everybody else of corruption, but nobody can accuse him. There is no body in Saudi Arabia or no organization can point a finger to him and talk about the way he's spending the country's resources. Real reform requires establishing a body that has all the authorities to investigate and try everyone. No one should be above the law. My fifth point of prospect of real reform is empowering Saudi women. And by empowering Saudi women mean putting them in leadership positions and elevating the male guardianship system and including them in government. They have been suffering for decades in Saudi Arabia and they're still suffering, and they really need to have a say in the future of their country. Number six, part of the prospect of real reform in Saudi Arabia is end exportation of Wahhabism overseas. Saudi Arabia and other countries have suffered from Wahhabism. The entire world is currently suffering from this lethal ideology. I would like to propose in reform Saudi Arabia, religion and state should be completely separate, but to have and also to promote intolerance and intra-faith dialogue among or between between different Islamic sects and groups. I think the only way we can promote tolerance and understanding is by letting different groups interact and try to either settle their differences or just live and let others live. Part of that can be done in the Holy Mosque, in the Grand Mosque in Mecca, where there used to be corners for the Maliki mazhab, for the Shafi'i mazhab, for all the mazhabs. Right now, only Wahhabism is there. So in a reformed Saudi Arabia, I would like to see all the Muslim sects have a place to practice or to teach their own ideology. This is how Muslim can learn that if their leaders can live together and can interact and can settle their differences, they can do so too. Number 8 was allowing establishment of political parties in Saudi Arabia. I would like to say that this is one of the things that people are looking forward to in a new Saudi Arabia. Right now, they don't have any part. They are not included. excuse me, in participating in the making of their countries and the decision making. So when they are included by taking part in political debate or in the political system in Saudi Arabia, I think they would feel that they have a stake in the future of their countries, and it would be helpful. Number 9 is regulating the budget that is allocated to the royal family. Royal family in Saudi Arabia, nobody knows how much money they spend. It is not listed in the budget. When the annual budget gets revised, there is nothing says this much is allocated to the royal family. So in a new Saudi Arabia, the royal family should have a regulated budget that people know that this is going to the royal family. They are in the thousands now, and I think they have more money than most of the Saudi people, and this is extremely unfair. My last point is empowering minority groups in Saudi Arabia. Let them have a say, let them practice their religion or their belief in whatever they believe. And when I say minorities, I also mean people who don't believe in anything. There is a huge number of people leaving Islam in Saudi Arabia, and they cannot be public about it. So you can only see them on Facebook or Twitter using, unreal names to hide their identity, because if their family found out, they will be in a lot of trouble. Thank you.
Please use the microphone and speak directly into it. That's right.
Thank you. Your 10 points to a very worthy objective. Michael Pompeo's 4 points for a win. The interesting thing, the key thing, I think, would be how you see getting from where we are to there. There being quite a distant future, I think. What would be the strategy that you would propose to the Saudi government to move toward your 10 points?
I mean, I would like simply to say, listen to the people. Listen to the people. It's not you. Currently, he is only listening to the people who say yes to him. Listen to the other voices, the people that you're putting in jail right now. As I said, organize a national unity conference where everybody is included to have a say in the future of their country. Bring people together and see what they want to talk about, what they want to see their country look like in 10 or 15 or 40 years. Yes.
at any given time now, there are over 100,000 Saudi students studying in the United States.
Yeah.
So what do you see as the largest impact, or what impacts will they have as they return to Saudi, and what impact will that have on the country?
Yeah, they are the future of Saudi Arabia. And I really think the sending Saudi people to the West is one of the greatest programs that the Saudi Arabia has done for its youth. I am very happy to see thousands of Saudis come to the States or Australia or London or France, and they will go back. They will go back and they will want to have their country look exactly like the country that they went and studied in. Currently, a lot of them are not encouraged to go back because seeing what this young crown prince is doing is really hurting them. I know some of them who decided to stay here, filed for asylum and stayed here, and they don't want to go back. I know a lot of women who came on scholarship and decided to stay here. You know why? Because of the current situation of women in Saudi Arabia. So, okay, they are the future. Let them have a say in the future of their country.
Hi. Do you see the fact that women are now allowed to drive as the beginning of a positive trend towards loosening human rights in Saudi Arabia?
Absolutely not. I think that was long overdue. I think women should be really compensated for not being allowed to drive for the past 50 years. And I actually called on women in Saudi Arabia not to drive until the women who call the women rights activists who are in jail right now are freed. They are the one who started the campaign for them. And I really think every Saudi woman who who drove the car is betraying this woman because they are the one who fought for this right, not the princes, not MBS, and they should take the credit, not princes or MBS or nobody. So I disagree with that, and to really support this point, I would like to say, how come you allow women to drive, and yet they can't drive until they get a permission from a father or a mother or a brother or a son? It's unrealistic. How come you arrest women whose only intention was to create an organization to save women, to rescue the ones that are oppressed by their own family members? I really think it's just a cosmetic thing. There is no country on earth where women can't drive. Even in territories that are controlled by ISIS, women can drive. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. My name is King Mallard. The last time there was a reform effort of this scale in this region, it was probably under the Shah, who launched his white revolution. And unlike Saudi Arabia, Iran had a competing elite in Mujahideen Pro. My question to you would be, do you think something similar is happening in Saudi Arabia? Is there a competing elite that can actually demand liberalization? And if so, who would they be? Would it be the Rashid dynasty in Ohio, or would it be in the Eastern Province, the oppressed Shia minority? Where do you see the constituency in Saudi Arabia that is going to push for such liberalization, or do you think it has to come purely from the top?
Well, as I said, MBS has a chance, has an opportunity to really reform and change the country because he has all the power right now to do so. The problem is he is not doing it. The problem is he's not listening to his people. In Saudi Arabia, there are groups of intellectuals. For example, there is the ACPRA group, HASM. It's the Association for Civil and Political Rights in Saudi Arabia. Every single member, almost every single member of this organization is in jail right now, serving 20 to 40 to 60 years. And you have dozens and dozens of people who really want to take part in shaping their own countries. We have a wave of political activists who are in London. Some of them are here, some of them in Australia. The only reason why they stayed where they are right now because they couldn't have a voice in their own country. This is why they became political activists and human rights activists. If you open the door, I assure you, you will see millions of Saudis talking about their aspiration for freedom, for liberty, and for a country that they can take part in managing and deciding its future.
Could you give us an idea of the effect of Wahhabism here in the U.S.? How important is the da'wah in our own
This is a very good question. I wrote something about an imam in California. I forgot the city, somewhere in California, and looking at the website of this Islamic community in California, I found out that this sheikh is teaching young Muslim there Wahhabism, real Wahhabism. The book, the three principles of Usul al-Thalatha and Kitab al-Tawheed, the book of monotheism. And these are the books that turned me into a radical growing up in Saudi Arabia. And I was astonished. I was appalled to really see this is going on in here. And I am sure there are a lot of Muslim community teaching the same books. So it is quite dangerous. I haven't done an extensive research about this phenomenon inside all cities or states, but this is one example that you can go to memory and find it, and it is very dangerous. Yes.
Sometimes I think that sometimes I think that there's no hope that will come to Saudi Arabia because everybody knows.
Can't hear. Speak up.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Speak up to you now.
Okay. Everybody knows that there is this hidden agreement between the royal families and the Wahhabis, which is the royal families will control the political life and the Wahhabis will control the religious and social life. I know that you made this distinction between religious and social, but in Saudi Arabia, the two things go hand in hand. Right? So if there is this agreement between the royal family and the Wahhabis, and also the school systems and the kids in the schools, starting from elementary school to all education, they have this tribal concept in their mind and they have the religion in their mind. So I don't think that even with Saudi Arabia, I mean, only you, I mean, and you said that you're not even a Saudi citizen. We can talk about Saudi freedom of expressions and all these things. So sometimes I think like it's not going to happen in Saudi Arabia unless there's a royal family of God. And if this happens, we're going to have something like, so we'll have to flip over and be something like Syria or Iraq, in which there will be no Saudi Arabia.
Well, yes, there is a historical ties between the Wahhabis and the Al Saud family. It is a known alliance between them. I really think reform is possible. As I said and proposed, separation between the religion and the state. this is the only way we can sideline the Wahhabis and have the Saudi people take control of their country. In the past, as I said, the government used to tell people that the religious establishment is the one preventing women from driving. It took a royal decree to end that. So I am sure if the king or crown prince MBS has the intention or the will to reform the country and to get rid of the religious establishment and take his legitimacy from his people, the people will support him. Everybody in Saudi Arabia understands the danger of Wahhabism and of radicalism and of intolerance. People are tired of being bombed and are tired of this hateful preaching. So there is a window of hope here by appealing to your people. Okay, there is one point that I didn't mention in my speech. I don't see any difference between Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, who claims he is the caliphate of the Muslims and wants to have Muslims pledge allegiance to him, and the way that Saudi Arabia currently is using the same concept of bay'ah to get legitimacy or to get approval from the people. It's the same concept. So for me, there is nobody. I would like to see nobody claiming to have any authority from God to have people follow him or give him allegiance. Let's just separate the religion from the state and have people have their civil system. Yes.
In Saudi now,
Could you wait
there's
for a microphone, please?
in Saudi there's a king.
Yes.
Now, will there be a prince who will follow him? It's sort of nepotism, isn't it? I mean, there's any hope for. Yeah, but I mean, the sequence though. I mean, it's in the family, and that's the way it always be.
Yes.
They'll inherit the throne.
Yes.
Okay. Now, I spent a month in Bahrain. My daughter's husband was assigned there to the embassy, and I enjoyed being in Bahrain, but we had the Shia and the Sunni to deal with. And of course, they were fighting among themselves. But the prince seemed to be wanting to bring a peace. I really think that maybe that's a model. Do you know whether there's a big change or there's a difference, or is there a divisiveness between Saudi and Bahrain? Bahrain's right there over the causeway.
No, there is no difference. Actually, Bahrain is under the control of Saudi Arabia right now.
Under control?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yes. The Saudi army, I would say, invaded Bahrain, I don't know, 2012,
Oh, yes.
when there were protests in Bahrain. And Bahrain is currently surviving surviving by Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia actually the one funding Bahrain, as we say. So even though Saudis go to Bahrain to watch movie, to go to movie theaters in Bahrain or to go to bars and drink alcohol. I think that is gradually changing because Bahrain is being turned into another Wahhabi state, and there is more influence from Saudi Arabia to turn Bahrain into another Saudi Arabia instead of modernizing Bahrain. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think we have two problems. We never defined what a moderate Muslim means.
Moderate.
Yeah. And now we have another problem. What is reform? Because all I hear coming from that area, whether it's CC or MDS or whatever, they're talking about the key of Chicago. They're talking about renewal of the discourse.
but not reforming the religion itself, even the most obnoxious part of it, like slavery or the oppression of women. So what is reforming the mind? Is it just reforming the discourse, or is it reforming the religion itself? Because those are two different things. And just a quick comment, there is one country where all your 10 points are applied. That country is Israel. It's the only one in the Middle East.
When I talk about reform, if we talk about reforming Islam, I mean reforming the religion. And my concept to that, or my idea on that, is to actually take what is positive and leave what is negative. I mean, it is a process that should take time, and it is a process that Muslims should take care of. Nobody else can make them do it unless they want to do it. And you really have a lot of versions of reformers around the world. And the ones that I am with, the one that I stick with, are the one who acknowledge that there are controversial, violent verses in the Quran. There are that the Islamic heritage itself, Islamic textbooks and traditions are a main source for terrorism and radicalism. And unless we find a solution to that, part of it, by saying, well, these are 1400 centuries ago, they could only apply back then, we shouldn't really bring them to the 21st century. This is one way of dealing with them. But unless we acknowledge that, unless we call it what it is, I don't think reform can happen. And this is why, when I talk about reform, I want that type of reform.
Yes. My name is Mansour al-Hadj. I'm from Iraq. And I would like to add one point to your 10 points. I think, as you know, from my experience as in Iraq, I do believe there is need to change the curriculum that related to the Islamic beliefs, even from the schools, from the preschool. Because what happened in Saudi Arabia or even in Iraq, they are teaching the extremism for the children. So there is no surprise we will have ISIS, or we will have a generation of Muslims who would not understand Islam as a moderate religion. They will understand it as extremes. So I just want you to consider this point to be added, changing the curriculum of the school from the
Well, I agree 100%. And then when I said separating religion from state, I mean in the school we are not gonna see any religious studies. It shouldn't be taught to people. In school, you teach people other subjects. I went to Saudi school myself, and I understand exactly what you mean. So I completely agree with you. Yes.
Yes, my name is hello. My name is Nick Leasis, and you mentioned in your remarks that you were radicalized and that you came about to promoting liberal democracy. I just would be very interested in hearing your story, how you came about to have such a transformation. And I just have to comment that you mentioned that there are many moderates, many atheists or agnostics in Saudi Arabia. Do you have any data that would support that conclusion? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It was a long journey for me. As Mr. Riley's have mentioned earlier, he wrote something regarding that. When I visited the Holocaust Museum, and it was a very emotional visit, knowing that I grew up hating Christians and Jews, people that I have never met in my life, just because I was told so. turning that page was really difficult, extremely difficult. And I would like to say that the only reason why I managed to change was through reading. I read a lot, and I found that there are ideas that I haven't been exposed to as I was growing up. So the first thing I thought about was I told myself that my mind was occupied by something that I did not choose to. I did not choose to have it in my mind, and I challenged myself by asking questions, by finding new questions to the answer that I get, and every time I get more interested and interested, and that led me to really question Islam itself, question religion, question how. And I really think that a healthy way of doing things, and it took me a while, and I see a lot of people struggling with that nowadays. When it comes to your second questions, I really don't have numbers, but I am part of a lot of groups that are where a lot of groups that have ex-Muslims in them, and they don't go public because fearing for their lives, even the ones who live here in the United States. And a lot of the ones that I know are from Saudi Arabia, and they have this thought, and they decided to leave the religion, but they can't really announce it. If you go online, you are gonna see a lot of people who express atheism, or some of them convert to Christianity, believing or thinking that is a more peaceful religion than the religion that they grew up believing. And I'm sure you will find some numbers, but I'm really sorry I don't have numbers for you. Yes, sir.
Great presentation. Thank you. So I'm going to ask a question that is maybe a little more, we haven't heard much about it, but New York Times 2015 had stories on this, that in some strains of Islam, they're teaching them now what's called a theology of rape, and rape jihad, as they did in Cologne, where massive organized rapes, organized by jihadis. Now, that starts here. It's been a huge war. It hasn't happened here from what I know. But the media covers everything up on this. Does this come out of Wahhabism? Where does this come from? I mean, the story that I read on my phone just a minute ago, talked about an 11-year-old girl was so sexually assaulted that it created all kinds of internal bleeding. And another one said, she's a little girl. Just leave her alone. He said, no, she's a slave and she knows how to do sex. The man got down before he raped her and prayed, because this is a religious themed thing that some of them are doing. No, we don't hear about this. Can you say something about that?
I mean, we have all heard about what ISIS have done to the Yazidis, and there are tons of stories online, and it is known to people that they sold the Yazidis. They considered them sex slaves, and a lot of them were raped. Okay, does it have precedence in Islam? I would say yes. I mean, it happened. It is part of jihad. It is something that the Prophet and his companions did, and ISIS and other groups are just following suit, following what they have read in these books, and they're doing it. So it is part of it, and I think it should stop. It's obviously, I mean, there is no question about it. Yes, sir.
Hey, great speech.
Thank you.
Can you shut my
Can you hear me okay? Okay, it's good. Can you hear me? Okay. Great speech, by the way. Thank you so much. Just to address that real quick, speaking as a Muslim, let's like take that in its entire context here. Like the story that you read, I'm sure you definitely hear it, but we have to acknowledge that that problem of interpretation is very much construed in media. We have to acknowledge that the primary reasons why people commit actions like those is because of economic inefficiency, growing up in hard circumstances, no jobs, no potential in life, and that leads you to take texts like a lot of people do with their own and do awful things with it. The same thing happens in Christianity, the same thing happens in Judaism, the same thing happens in everything. With that said, I think we have to acknowledge it and take it in its entire context. Second, I would like to, do you not hear me? I'm sorry, somebody just
I can't hear it.
Okay. You're dropping your voice and we can't hear it.
I'm close, holding the microphone as close to
Just talk loud.
Okay.
I don't think it's on.
It's not on.
Now it's on. Sorry. Sorry about anybody who just couldn't hear what I was saying. But again, I was just trying to say the primary reasons why people commit actions like that, speaking as someone who studies this subject actually, is because of economic conditions. And that leads people to see, because they see power dynamics with potentially raping people, seeing power dynamics of sex, being given that, guns, money, whatever it is. So I just wanted to put that in context for quick from my experience. Secondly, I just wanted to ask you a question. So you talk about the separation of church and state, or mosque and state in this context. So we see a prevalent thing happening around the Muslim world where this is a quite maximalist religion. I mean, a gentleman from the addressed this quite a bit ago. So this isn't just prevalent in Saudi Arabia, it's prevalent in Egypt, in Jordan, in Turkey, everywhere. Right? Most Muslim countries sort of have this idea where religion really takes advantage of the entire society. And that's just the nature of religion. Right? And you talk about this whole idea of separating church and state. With respect to Europe and most of the Western world, that took almost 200 years to sort of fix, right? The Enlightenment, a process that happened between the 1600s and 1700s that manifested itself in the American and French revolutions, two very violent conflicts, right? So if I'm Mohammed bin Salman and I'm looking at my options here and I see separation of church and state as being a solution to the country, seeing what had happened in Europe historically that ended in the toppling of the government and the loss of a lot of lives. Why, in my best interest, would I want that to be the case in my own country and sort of having this idea of the separation of churches? I'm just curious to hear your thoughts.
Okay, because one of the ideas that MBS is trying to sell to the West right now is that, well, if I modernize Saudi Arabia, the entire Muslim world will be modernized. And I completely disagree with him. The only way, well, Saudi Arabia, as we all know, is a very important country because of Mecca and Medina and birthplace of Islam. But if he is not applying the reform that is needed, none is going to follow. For example, if he is not allowing different religious sects to meet in the Grand Mosque and talk and reconcile and call for peace and all that, it's not going to happen anywhere. If he is, for example, claiming to be Khadim al-Haramain al-Sharifain, or custodian of the two holy mosques, and wants people to give him allegiance in an Islamic way, it's not, other nations are not going to follow. But if he managed to reform the country by allowing people to take part in ruling their own country, by allowing political participation, I am sure that would have a great effect on the rest of the world. Of course, if he cut the funding from these these Saudi organizations in Africa and Asia and everywhere in the world, I think we can see changes. I think we can see people moving away from Wahhabism, because, as I said, part of the reason a lot of people are involved in this is because it's a source of living. A lot of people are making living out of Saudi Arabia because they are promoting the Wahhabism and the Saudi version of Islam. And one thing I didn't mention, that MBS and is instead of bringing different Muslim sects together, he is actually promoting anti-Shiism by criticizing part of the Shia religion in a TV interview, and accusing Iran of seeking to dominate over or occupy or take over Mecca. I really think that is unrealistic, and that is, again, is just fueling the tension, the sectarian tension between different Muslim groups. To respond to your question more precisely, I think he either has to listen to the people or just wait for the demise of the dynasty, the Al Saud dynasty, because history tells us that this is what's going to happen when people don't listen to their nations, when they rule by themselves without including people. I think this is the natural outcome.
I thought you might speak to perhaps Salman's trying to get ahead of the fact there's an inversion problem. I think regarding people in Saudi Arabia are under the age of 30. Is that correct? So, and you're saying that he's just putting a band-aid on problems right now, but he should reform more general. Right? I mean, so when the other gentleman was talking about the economic portion of it, I mean, you have to get ahead of that, because I think that was the main, can you hear me? That was the main thrust of why we started reform in the first place of any sort. And then they have a, Saudi Arabia also has alliance with Egypt right now of some sort, maybe? I don't know if that's helpful.
Saudi Arabia has what with Egypt?
Alliance. An alliance with
Alliance, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good example.
Again, it has been presented that MBS is trying to modernize Saudi Arabia and make it similar to the United Arab Emirates. I really think that is thinking that is selling Saudi Arabia short. I think the United Arab Emirates example is really not a great example. It's in fact, Saudi Arabia can be a better country than the United Arab Emirates, whose record in human rights is as bad as Saudi Arabia, where workers being mistreated in the United Arab Emirates. Saudi Arabia can do better. Saudi Arabia can really be a great example in the entire world. There is a great diversity of people in Saudi Arabia that, maybe if you watch the World Cup, I know they didn't do very well, but you can see some of that diversity in the Saudi national team. There is a lot of talent there because most Muslim people moved from all over the Muslim world to Saudi Arabia. This is what my grandma did, and settled there. So you have great diversity. Saudi Arabia can be something similar to the United States, where you have people from different parts of the world, and intermarriages, and if we allow, or if MBS or if the government allows the right circumstances or the right atmosphere to all this talent to really flourish and express themselves, there is no room for expression for people. So how can you find all this talent? How can you see all the different voices? Yes, Saudi Arabia is in alliance with Egypt and the United Arab Emirates. They are leading what is called the counter revolution in the Arab world. This is why this is one of the themes that Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates are using to tell their nations that demanding your right is gonna lead to your country becoming like Syria or Yemen or Libya, which I really think it's a wrong assessment. I personally believe that the Arab Spring is the best thing that happened to the Arab and Muslim people, period, because they learned that they can change things, and they have managed to change things. Now they saw it happening, they know they can do it again and again. So even though a lot of people say millions have died and other hundreds of thousands of people are displaced and move around the world and cities have been destroyed, guess what? I mean, in Europe, we have witnessed war before Europe become the Europe that we know. And a European nation, when they have problems, they get together and talk. Now, the Arabs and Muslims really have to do that as well, because at one point, they will get tired of fighting. And the only alternative to fighting is talking and reconciling. Yes.
Sorry, wait for the mic. I'm sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for this illuminating talk. I remember when Prince Mohammed bin Salman said, that was a very striking moment when he said, Saudi Arabia is not a normal place. And that was a criticism. I recall in the last days of the Soviet Union, in my travels there, I was constantly told by people, we just want to be normal. When you scratch the surface, you discovered that they had no idea what normal meant. Because over a period of 70 years, it had been obliterated. There was no surviving cultural memory of normal. And that's why Russia is in the condition in which it is today. The question being, does Prince Mohammed bin Salman, does he know what normal is? His experience of the world, he was not educated abroad. His experience of the world is not that broad. Number one. Number two, I think it was King Abdullah who said, obviously some years ago, if there were democracy in Saudi Arabia, every tribe would have a flag. I mean, every tribe would have a party, and it just couldn't work. Both of my questions point to the same issue that has been raised by a number of people tonight, that much of what you are hoping for and working toward can only work under certain cultural preconditions. Maybe I would summarize them in that there would be a broad embrace and belief in the principle that all people are created equal. I don't see that being anywhere near the case from my admittedly ignorant position.
These are very good questions. Does MBS know what normal is? Obviously, he's not the brightest one from, his father's dozens of kids or princes, one of whom went to the moon a long time ago, I think 1990, maybe before that. The only reason why MBS was chosen to be the next king is the fact that he is his father's favorite son. And number two, he was told that he is the one who would unite the royal family, bringing the ruling back to the Al Saud, and then extending the Al Saud ruling of Saudi Arabia. Obviously, again, he was not educated in the West, and some people tried to compare him with his uncle Faisal. I don't know if he really know what normal is. I think he said he learned a lot from his father, but personally I believe his only duty right now is to extend the ruling of his family. All the reform part of it is just cosmetic, has nothing to do with the reality on the ground. For King Abdullah's statement, well, this is part of Al Saud's strategy, is undermining the power of tribes, because they normally tell the other tribes that you used to be nothing. We're the one who united you, brought you together, and made this state. So without us, you're nothing. And tribalism is big in most Bedouin societies, and even in Africa, where I am from. Even in Africa, when you have political systems, most tribes have one representative. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think people would move away from it eventually. It would start as tribalism. I think in Iraq it's somehow religious and tribalism, but it's a practice. Democracy is a practice, and when people, the first time maybe they choose somebody from their own tribe, the second time maybe they choose somebody who really represent their interests. So let's give people the right to be and learn. It's an experience. Unless you start it, you are not gonna know, and people have to experience it. I would like to say that Saudi ruling family should stop looking at the Saudi people as kids, as children, as babies. The Saudi people are very well educated, and they know their best interest. Give them a chance. This is what I would say. Another question? Yes.
One more.
Hi. I was wondering if, I know that Saudi recently decided to start issuing tourist visas again. So I was wondering if you thought that as MBS looks to diversify the economy away from oil, in part by attracting more tourists, if you think that will be like sort of a spur for him to modernize, or if you think it will be more of a system where tourists are going to be able to go to Saudi and kind of like follow different rules than actual citizens?
I really think it's a good thing to open Saudi Arabia up for people. I don't see it as a source of sustainable income for Saudi Arabia. I mean, they already use Hajj for that type of things, and millions of people go to Saudi Arabia every year for pilgrimage reasons. Saudi Arabia, even though being the most producer of oil in the world, the economy is really suffering. As you mentioned, most of the Saudi people are under 30, but now they are really suffering because he started applying or taxing people with no representation, of course. So now everything is more expensive for the average Saudi people, yet they don't have the jobs that they wanted. part of his strategy is nationalizing jobs in Saudi Arabia, meaning replacing foreign workers and expat with Saudis. And, you know, there was a report that was published two days ago. Almost 800,000 of immigrants left Saudi Arabia in the past 2 years. The reason being, MBS started charging these immigrants for the kids that they have. So if you have 5 kids, you pay more money. And this fees increases every single year. So a lot of them decided to leave. Now companies are suffering because normally they would hire people from different parts of the world who would really accept a reasonable, decent salary, and you know they work for they can live their life on based on that, you know, salary. Saudis basically want higher salaries and, you know, less stress. This is what a lot of people are being saying. I know a lot of hardworking Saudis. They work in restaurant, and work is a job. There is no question about that. It's the way it has been all the time, because the economy in Saudi Arabia, this is the way it was established. This is how it was established, by bringing foreign workers, paying them really low salaries. And now when you try to nationalize all these jobs, the salary would not be enough for the Saudis because their expenses are higher.
Great, thank you very much.